You're listening to the Today's Eden podcast, episode 29. This is where the struggles are real, the callings are heavy, the kids are sticky. We come together because it takes a village, and this is your tribe. Hey guys, happy Wednesday, and thanks for listening to the Today's Eden podcast today. I am so excited to share with you my interview with author Andrea Miller, CEO of Your Tango, the website dedicated to love and relationships, and also the book that she just released, Radical Acceptance, that just hit bookshelves May 2nd of this year. And in this interview, we talk about what radical acceptance means, how we can love without expectations, and she shares with us some tips on how we can apply the steps that she has in her book to our lives today, so we can go ahead and use those actions and apply it to our relationships, our marriage, our relationships with our children and our friends. It's a really awesome episode, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys. Let's get to it. Hey, Andrea, I'm so happy to have you on the Today's Eden podcast. Your book, Radical Acceptance, has gotten awesome reviews, and I was really excited to buy it and to read it, and I'm pretty sure it's because not only myself, but all of us could use a little help in the love department.
Oh, totally. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have fans out there.
Yeah. So before we get started, I would love for you to tell the listeners a little background about who you are, what life kind of looks like, what your family looks like right now.
Yeah, totally. So my day job is as CEO and founder of Your Tango. We are the leading digital publisher focused on love and relationships. And I've been doing that for a really long time. And it's really, frankly, as a result of the kind of just what I've learned and how passionately immersed I've been in the quote unquote love business that has led me to write this book. But in parallel, and I'll come back to the book in a minute, but in parallel, I'm a mom with two little boys, Alexander and Nicholas, 4 and 7, and married to a man named Sanjay, who, if he was here, he'd say, and I star in the book, because it's a book about love and relationships, and he does indeed play a starring role. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of brings me full circle to the book. So Radical Acceptance, in a nutshell, it's all about learning to replace judgment with compassion and empathy. And the idea is that it is very much, I want to be careful and not say autobiographical, because I don't want anybody to think they're reading my memoir. It's not. But one of the through lines definitely is about the mistakes and challenges that I continue to make in my, eventual marriage, and just how that was at the same time, or ultimately, incredibly beneficial, because it became transformative and it led to so many wonderful insights and the ability for me, frankly, as a CEO, as a mom, as a wife, as a friend, as a sister, et cetera, to be better in those different roles. And it comes back, to the central idea that, and I think to your point that, I think we all can use a little help in the love and relationships department. I think it can be summarized most succinctly by saying radical acceptance it helps you to learn to love the people in your life as they are, as opposed to how you want them to be. And really being able to embrace those differences, and even some of those, and that's how I always describe replacing judgment with compassion and empathy. It's not enough just to say, I'm just going to take you as you are. It's like, how can you really open your heart and mind, and not frankly just exclusively to other people? I mean, I'm as big of an advocate for radically accepting oneself. In fact, I'd say it's going to be next to impossible to really radically accept other people if you can't extend that compassion and empathy to yourself. So I'm kind of a woman on a mission to help get radical acceptance practiced far and wide, because it is a practice, but it is a transformative one.
Yeah. And I was reading your blog as well, or not your blog, but on Your Tango. And you have some awesome blog posts on there about loving yourself, and you're using this idea of radical acceptance towards our kids, and even like you said, how the story isn't autobiographical, but like you just sharing your personal life. Like, I think that is super helpful because that's something that we can relate to versus when we read a book and it's just somebody giving you an idea of how things should be. Well, it's like, well, you know, they're not coming from a place of, I've been there, done that kind of thing. And so for you to say like, this is what we did and like, this is what happened. And then not only do you talk about, you know, you and Sanjay's relationship, but you also talk about other people. And that is super helpful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, what I really try to do, even out of the gate, is, and it started with a real focus on romantic love, but I try to emphasize out of the gate by, you know, as listeners would expect by the name Sanjay, one would imply that he's Indian. I'm not. I'm, you know, a gal from Minnesota, Caucasian lady from Minnesota. So we come from very different, very, very different backgrounds and different cultures, and even going beyond just romantic love. My whole mission is to say, no matter what relationship it is, and whether you're homosexual or not, whether you're religious or not, whether you are different religions, or any of those different races, any of those differences across, and especially as more mixed, quote unquote mixed relationships bubble up, that this idea that radical acceptance is relevant to anybody who wants to make a positive impact in their life. And yeah, I mean, I really was deliberate. And in the point that you were referencing about how personal it is, it felt like it had to be for me to be able to make the kind of impact I aim to make. And I want to create that. I'm a big believer in storytelling. I mean, sure, data is great and advice is great, and I've peppered in plenty of advice and data for sure, but I'm a big believer that stories stay with us, and stories are relatable. We can see ourselves, or we can see other people in these stories and experiences. So because I want radical acceptance to be something people can readily adopt, that I wanted to tell the stories that I experienced, and I feel like there's so much I feel like so many of us suffer in silence. We think everybody else has it figured out. And gosh, Facebook isn't making that any easier. Right?
Yep.
We look at all these posts and everybody's having better vacations and and better looking kids and, all that stuff. And we know it's not true, but there's a part of our cerebral cortex who kind of falls prey to that. And it's nonsense. And I think one of the greatest gifts that, like I was saying with my day job with Your Tango, one of the great gifts we give that I really tried to bring back to my book is this honesty, and sometimes brutal honesty, and the ugly truths and the relatability. One of my big lines, one of the most powerful things you can say to somebody is "me too," right? When they're suffering, when they have doubt, to feel like, oh my God, I'm not alone, is a really powerful way, I think, to help validate those feelings, but not to wallow in them and just go, Debbie Downer forevermore, but instead, oh my gosh, I feel afraid, or I feel doubt, and then you go, okay, but here's how I can make it better, right? And here's how I can trust myself, and here's how I can find that empowerment and courage. And so often looking at somebody else who has exhibited bravery and courage, it's contagious, right? I mean, we are social creatures, and the opposite is contagious. Stress is contagious. It's more contagious than a cold. So my logic is, if I can create this social contagion by helping people feel brave and feel like, oh, wow, that's a good idea. I can do that. That I think that there's a much greater chance that the world will be a better place, because people will find that this is actually pretty accessible to them. That's my goal anyway.
Yeah. And I'd say you're doing a pretty good job. But since most of our listeners are married or have been married, and most of us have children, I wanted to jump right in and talk about some of the ways that we can apply and make this idea of radical acceptance applicable to our lives, and also just kind of get some of your feedback and tips on these things. But so what are some signs that we aren't accepting or being accepting of our spouse or partner?
Let me just also tee it up, and I'm glad you emphasized that, because I'm a big believer that radical acceptance is one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids. And let's face it, with the divorce rate of 45%, that means next to almost half of everybody, the half that's still together. Let's face it, most of those relationships aren't all peaches and cream.
Right.
And so we know empirically, and in every other way that and statistically, et cetera, that relationships, particularly marriage or, even any long-term kind of romantic relationship is going to be, if not really, really hard and bring you to your knees, at least pretty challenging. Right.
Yeah.
And often there's, a lot of fighting, depression, stress, like all those negative feelings inherently bubble up. And I say in part that radical acceptance is, one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids. And I say that because by having a set of parents or, a mother who has a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever the case may be, seeing that kind of adult relationship, I'm a firm believer the best way to teach our kids is to model.
Yeah.
They watch us and it's conscious, it's unconscious. And sure, of course, we're going to try to tell them to do the right thing. But the most powerful way that we can teach them is to is to show what a healthy, loving relationship looks like. And that we create that environment where either a home is kind of toxic and stressful or mostly warm and filled with love. And I don't mean at all to sound like, of course, in almost any household, there's going to be fighting. I'm not trying to imply that that's not, but this idea of saying, whoa, by creating this environment where the home is mostly positive and nurturing and warm, and that tough relationship issues are dealt with in a way that isn't just completely toxic, is to me the best, because we already know this is so hard. And so with that kind of as the kind of foundation here, the thinking, I think you asked about like, how do we know if we need to be more accepting? I mean, I did interview a ton of people, and I've been observing couples for, almost 2 decades, in addition to just having my own experiences. I think this, probably one of the most obvious is just, is there a lot of tension? Is there a lot of fighting? Is there, and sometimes some of these relationships can be characterized with, it's very overt and palpable versus others that can be a little more insidious and almost passive aggressive. No matter what, either you're feeling the love and you're feeling warm and you're feeling positive, or you're not. I don't, particularly in a marriage or the long-term relationship situation, not often are you just feeling completely neutral. If anything, I feel like if you're completely neutral, it's probably game over, because then you've checked out, right? Mm-hmm. Then you're disinterested and it's probably too late. So I think when you're feeling those feelings of judgment or anxiety or disappointment or any of those things that are normal, this idea of going, I break radical acceptance down into 5 steps. And I always say with the first step, just love him or just dump him. And when I say him, it's her, right? I don't, it's like, I don't want to be like too kind of,
right.
Kind of specific over here. I mean, it really is meant to be for everybody, but, ultimately either you're going to be with somebody and decide, I know their good parts, I know their bad parts. And, if I'm constantly feeling resentment, feeling doubt, et cetera, then I go, well, you're the problem, right? And in fact, I should have even said out of the gate, I tried everything until I realized in my own relationship that I had to change, right? And that's like, kind of, I say it with a little degree of irony, because it's like, golly, I'm trying everything else and I'm blaming him and I'm pointing fingers. And then it was like, by the grace of God, really, that I go, and, maybe because there are no other options, it was like, whoa, what am I doing wrong? Yeah. How am I part of the problem? As good as my intentions are, and as much as I try to be loving and take the high road. So I say, when you see those things, unless you go like, this person is doing something that's so reprehensible to me and I just can't take it and it's wrong, in which case then I say, then you probably shouldn't be in the relationship. But if you're deciding to be with somebody, then I say, make peace with those things that you're judgmental about and really, dig into them and try to understand, what I have found in virtually all these scenarios. Sure, so, nobody likes to be, my husband, I always say he's a proud Virgo. And for any Virgos listening, or your spouses who will agree with this, a Virgo is a tough person to love because they're hypercritical, right? And this is great in a lot of ways, right? The perfectionist who wants to make everything better, better, better. But it can be tough when you feel like you're always on the receiving end of that criticism. So my husband and I now, thankfully, we can joke about it. In fact, there was a kind of a meta moment when I realized that, that this was the defining trait of Virgos. And it was like, oh my God, it's him, not me, right? And I realized like, that's just who he is. And he is brilliant and good and kind and in all these other ways, but he is hypercritical, and that's not going to change, necessarily. But, and this is the big but. So I say, try to make peace with those things. If you go, you know what, I can't change them. It doesn't work to try to change them. So just to try to make peace with those characteristics. But then I'm going to skip to step 5 of radical acceptance, the one that frankly, these are really the two where the rubber meets the road. I really advise people to practice the platinum rule. And the platinum rule takes the golden rule one very important step further. The golden rule is love each other how we want to be loved. And the platinum rule says love your partner or love anybody in your life how they want to be loved. And so this idea of really figuring out what makes them feel the most loved and appreciated, and then really prioritizing them. I mean, so in the vast amount of research that I've done over the years, one of the top 2 reasons for discord in a relationship and what often ends in divorce or breakups is that one or both partners don't feel sufficiently valued. They don't feel prioritized. Right. And I always say, raise your hand if you're guilty of taking your significant other for granted. I mean, because we all do it. So when it's that, so it ends up being twofold. And I'm going to come full circle here because there's really good news in this, that it's, yes, just love him or just dump him. Try to make peace with those challenging bits. But then this idea of saying, how can I really make my partner feel really loved and really appreciated? And it doesn't necessarily mean having to go to the end of the earth. Sometimes it's the smallest gestures. It's those kind words of gratitude and appreciation. Even when you feel like, well, why should I thank him for taking out the garbage? I just did the dishes. Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, like, how hard is it to say thank you? How hard is it to show that appreciation and to not feel like you're, sort of a secondhand citizen for showing gratitude? So then this idea of, and how can I, like I always say, I cook a lot more than I normally would, but the weight of my husband's heart is through his stomach. And it doesn't make me a bad feminist to cook regularly for him. He does a lot of other wonderful things for me, and I know it means so much. So coming full circle in my story, how I've made peace with the a crazy Virgo in him is by making peace and saying, you know what, I'm just going to love you as you are. Criticism and all. I'm going to cook extra for you. I'm going to try to be extra appreciative and proactive and, touchy-feely and all those things that make both of us feel good. And guess what? He's a lot less critical.
Yeah.
I'm just like, duh. You know what I mean? So I feel like those things, and that's where I just say love starts with you, right? And of course, I want Sanjay to do better. I want everybody, anybody else who has a partner to do better. But it's like, I can only do what I can do. And if I bring my A game and I bring my full open heart to the relationship and frankly, and that's where I started a moment ago, not just to my marriage, but to my family. Like it's a huge difference. I mean, 2 crazy little 4 and 7-year-old kids, like anybody who's been around, I mean, any kids I know is a handful, but especially 2 little hyperactive boys, things can get really stressed out fast. And I know if I'm showing up with an open heart, not stressed out, not judgy, but instead ready to love and ready to just really try to, prioritize my husband and be the kind of the best person that I can be in that scenario, it has a dramatic impact on the quality of life in our family. I mean, it's like, and believe me, we have descended into chaos and shouting and tears and, that ugliness that comes from kind of that, how that negativity starts to spiral and then, geez, Sanjay makes me mad and I want to hit back. And next thing you know, I'm yelling at my kids. And that's when I talked a few minutes ago about how contagious stress is. Yeah. Like, you're stressed out because you don't like that your husband has, criticized you for emptying the dishwasher wrong. Well, he's really not criticizing you for that. What he's probably really criticizing you for is the fact that you haven't paid attention to him or, you know, looked in his eyes, or, you know what I mean? Like, connected with him. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we see. I mean, that describes my experience. It describes so many where we're taking each other for granted. We're not prioritizing each other. So all this negativity, and it's not even just limited to Virgos, right? All of us are guilty of taking our frustrations out in childish, you know, petty, stupid ways. And then suddenly it feels like, oh my gosh, it's Armageddon. And that's a really bad environment, you know, particularly for a kid, but it's bad for all of us. So I feel like all of that can be turned upside down and frankly, you know, purified, if you will, if the person who, you know, takes this to heart goes, oh my gosh, I can do this differently. And it's a practice for sure. But in some ways, the good news is it's not that hard. Sometimes it can be hard, but it's not always that hard. It's a mindset that you go, oh, you know, it's not about somebody else making me happy. And right, we've all been kind of somehow weirdly trained to think, oh my gosh, this marriage is going to make me happy, and these kids are going to make me happy, and all this stuff is going to make me happy. It doesn't work that way, right? We have to decide this is what we're going to show up with: a full heart, ready to be loving, and you know, gosh, just not willing to let the ego have its way, particularly when it comes to the petty BS, right? Yeah. And so often it's the petty BS. It starts small, but then it escalates, and you have shouting and tears, you know, for really no good reason. And that's
right.
Those are the kinds of things that I feel like for people to take to heart in an actionable way is just a powerful way to create a home that creates just a lot of love and a lot of great memories.
Yeah, and I think that's where you mentioned this in your book, but like a common thing that everybody is always talking about, or you hear couples say when they're in like a rift or like a hard season, is that you love each other, but you don't feel loved. And like you said, that it might not be that they're cynical about or critical about how you unloaded the dishwasher, but that there's a lack of, you know, like, or there's a disconnect, and that you kind of need to pay attention to that. And like, well, why is that? And like, not just react to the situation, but to like, I think, and you even say this in your book, to like stop and reflect and introspect, to like see if it's you, like what's really going on. And that's something that I didn't go into my marriage knowing whether, like, that we would both come to the table with baggage. Like, you know, like you just assume that two people come together and they're like, it's, if you think that they're the one, that it just magically works, and you don't consider cultural differences. You don't consider that you come with different backgrounds and issues and experiences that, you know, change the way you feel about certain situations, and that you have different like love languages and different needs and all these things. And those are just some things that I was not aware of that like totally rocked our world, or at least mine, when we got married. And so I think just paying attention to those things, and like you said, not expecting them. And if that, all that is true, then you can't expect them to make you feel complete and all the, you know, and give you all the butterflies every day, and, you know, all these, and it be perfect. And
totally. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think you articulated that so perfectly. And you know, the thing that I say to my kids, you know, often a dozen times a day is you get what you give, right? And I feel like somewhere down the road, somebody somehow left that page out of the instruction manual to life, that it's like this idea that we expect people to think like us and be like us and love us how we want to be loved. And, you know, it's kind of insane, you know, when it's like, duh, like, of course it's not going to work like that. But for some weird reason, I feel like so many of us are in this kind of zombified autopilot mode where, you know, unconsciously that's what we expect. We expect people, you know, our significant other to think like us, to be like us, to, you know, to take the initiative. And that was one of the biggest mistakes I made. It's like when I felt hurt by my husband, you know, often I'd fight back, or I'd totally withdraw, thinking weirdly and you know, inappropriately and immaturely that, oh, like he'll want to fix it, and he'll come in and he'll say, oh, you know, like how can I make it right? But he would do the opposite. It would be like he would just be that much more angry, right? Because he feels hurt and abandoned, and, you know, let's face it, the vast majority of us, when we feel hurt or abandoned, either we're going to get really angry or we're going to get really depressed. Mm-hmm. And neither of those is a place of empowerment.
Right.
And so, yeah, so it's just like, when you don't feel loved enough, as much as it's tempting to want to hit back or want to withdraw, I say do the opposite. Love as much as you possibly can. And it's not to say be a doormat. I mean, as you probably recall from my book, there are a lot of women who have that concern, like, oh my gosh, if I just radically accept him, won't that make me a doormat? And I say the opposite is true. It makes you stronger to be loving. It makes you stronger to know your worth. And then you say, I'm going to love you. I'm going to go I'm going to go the extra 15 miles for you. But if somebody isn't worthy of that love, then you're strong enough to say, or can't give it back to you, then you're strong enough to say, this is not a love worth having, or there isn't, I might love this person, but if they can't love me back, then it's game over. Right. So it's just like, I think there's this myth and this idea of like, we want what we pay for. We want to be assured we're not going to be suckers and be the one that loves too much. I say, be the one that loves too much. I challenge you, right? Because what ends up happening is the more you're loving and open-hearted, it's kind of this magical trick that Mother Nature plays. I think that, when you're able to do that, people respond, and they most often they respond in kind. And I say, if they don't respond in kind, you're either no worse off, or you go, okay, this person is just not. It's not going to be a sustainable relationship for us. And I'm glad I know, and I'm glad I went to the earth and into the earth to make it happen, rather than staying in something that feels like I'm being starved, or just perpetually feeling like I'm in this chronic kind of dysfunctional place that so many of us end up staying in for far too long.
Yeah. And you even you even have an area in your book where you talk about those, and you call them like red flag things, where you're not saying like you have to love these people and stay in it. If it's unhealthy and if it's, XYZ things, then maybe you should consider like this isn't a good place for you to be in. And then also, I think my favorite chapter, or like one of my favorite chapters, is you talk about, you have the 5 steps for radical acceptance, and mine was step 3, and that was radical communication, creating a safe space to be heard and really seen. And that one was really like, you broke it down to things that we do, and I'm like, yes, I do that. Yes, I do that, and and it was really good. But yeah, like you talk about, sarcasm was one of mine, and it wasn't, and it was so great that you were saying like, you're not asking the person reading it to change themselves. Like if, you're a sarcastic person, then, you're a sarcastic person. But when you go to fights now, like what does sarcasm bring to a fight? Well, then it's a totally different thing, and it's not funny. It's not witty. It's not, like it's different. And then now, as you brought up, modeling for our kids, and I'm like, well, sometimes I am sarcastic in our fights, but when I'm fighting and I'm sarcastic, it doesn't come off as like playful, and it's like something that I don't want my kids to repeat to their spouses.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So, but yeah, I love that chapter. But what are some practical tips that you could highly encourage us to start practicing today as women walk away from this episode that they can just start doing now?
Well, I think there's you say there's a lot in the book that's really practical, and it does give a lot of actionable advice. I think this idea of just kind of as a fundamental framework, the idea of kind of a couple things. One, just this idea of love starts with me, right? And I'll couple that. Well, actually, I'll say 3 things, because I think they all really go hand in hand. This idea as a starting point, love starts with me, and as a mantra, and as something that you can think about. So that's one. I would say the bit about learning to love people as they are, not how you want them to be. I would say that's number 2, this idea of just saying, how can I be really mindful? And again, it's not just about these, marriages or romantic relationships. I mean, I've had really challenging aspects of my relationship with my mom, for example, and she's lovely in so many ways, but there are ways that really push my buttons. Yeah. And I find it doesn't help at all for me, to your point, to be sarcastic, to be impatient, to be anything other than compassionate and going, she's a wonderful woman. Of course, she's imperfect. I'm imperfect too. So let me meet her where she is with as much love and compassion as I can. And and in part, I say this can and frankly should be practiced with any relationship worth having. Mm-hmm. How can we meet people where they are and, take them as they are rather than trying to change them? Because it's totally liberating. First of all, you're not going to change anybody. Let's denude ourselves of that illusion. But it's liberating. It's like, oh, I don't have to be kind of judgy and impatient. Like, it makes me feel so much better. Mm-hmm. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is really going full circle to, so the thing I was talking about, and I'll kind of break it down in a super actionable way. I talk about it, I think, in chapter 9 or 10, this idea of really trying to give, maybe any relationship that's worth having, but particularly maybe your marriage, or to your spouse or your significant other, 3 compliments every day. And what that does is a whole host of wonderful things. It reduces cortisol, the stress hormone, for both of you. It reduces cholesterol for both of you. It increases, I want to say, dopamine, one of those good neurotransmitters. Mm-hmm. So it has real, meaningful health impacts. And it's like, again, this idea that you get what you give. You don't sit around and wait for the person to go, oh, and X, Y, and Z, and you just do it freely. You find the positive. You focus on the positive. You give expression and gratitude to the positive, and it's kind of magical again how that creates a positive environment and a positive energy. That sure, there may be plenty of other issues in the relationship, but that kind of taking initiative and love starts with me, and how can I find bits of gratitude and reasons to praise my partner? By kind of making that a habit, it can really meaningfully impact the tenor of a relationship, so that you can be, if you have, other real issues, at least there's a safer place and more common ground from which to tackle these other bigger issues. So those are the kind of 3 I'd say go hand in hand.
Yeah, those are great. And not only will our doing the 3 compliments every day be beneficial to our marriage, but apparently it would be awesome for our health.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, we are as human beings, we can only thrive in nurturing, loving relationships, mm-hmm. and physiologically and emotionally and in every other way. So it's like, if I always say, if you care about your health, if you're doing exercise and eating well and have a good diet, add radical acceptance to your routine from a health perspective, because there's so much data out there. Even cancer treatment, I don't want to get too out of the, league over here, but there's some incredible data that talks about how people who are being treated for cancer, by having a loving, supportive environment and, relationships, that presence is in some instances as impactful as getting chemotherapy. Wow. Right. Yeah. And so there's there's way more data beyond that really underscores how important good, healthy relationships are to our physiological health and emotional health.
Yeah. Yeah. And before we continue, I just wanted to acknowledge you. I have 3 last questions, but I wanted to go ahead and say that this book was really, really great in that a lot of books that you buy, it's kind of like, I don't know, like I feel like it's not applicable, or it's not, I can't connect to it emotionally, and I can't apply it in my daily life. And I feel like this is an honest and very encouraging way to talk about reconnecting and love, and actually looking at not only my relationship as a whole, but also just myself and my tendencies in myself, which I feel like a lot of times is ignored. And it's just this, here's this you do these 5 steps and then your marriage will be great. And it's but you forgot about, which I feel like your book is the foundation of, okay, I got to start with me. And and you've kind of said that a few times in this interview. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to let you know that this book is awesome, and encourage the listeners that they really need to check it out, because it's really good.
Well, thank you. Well, let me just also emphasize, because the term radical is in the zeitgeist, and there are a few other books that have radical acceptance, or radical self-acceptance in the title. So this one is Radical Acceptance: The Secret to Happy, Lasting Love. Yes. So if anybody is looking for it, they can find it.
Yes, definitely. And I will link it in the show notes for sure. And then the last 3 questions I wanted to ask you is, if you could name the most influential book that you've read, what would it be?
There are really two. I'm going to start with one called Soulmates by Thomas More. In fact, I started reading that book, and I read a bit out loud to my husband, and that got me started on becoming an entrepreneur in the relationship space. But the one, so super influential in my life in that regard. But I think the one that right now, frankly, I've bought copies for a lot of people, and I've recommended it to a ton of people. It's a 20-plus-year-old book called A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, and it's so powerful and it's so beautiful. And I'm glad to say there's some really good parallels with Radical Acceptance as well, which is nice. But she, she just writes so beautifully about love and trust, and it is a wonderful book. I would highly recommend that. I think that and Radical Acceptance go hand in hand.
Yeah. And then if you could empower women in one way, what would it be?
Radical acceptance. I mean, of course, got to give a little plug to that. But truly, I mean, this idea of, I feel like we're our own worst enemies. We're so critical of ourselves. And again, it's like the more I learn to love myself and not be critical of myself, the better able I am to extend that love and compassion to the people I care about. So it's very much it can be a vicious cycle, right? We feel badly about ourselves. We're, ugly and mean-spirited. Or we feel good about ourselves and we open our hearts and, keep it real with one another. Say, me too, when we're feeling vulnerable or filled with self-doubt. So to really open our hearts and minds to one another, I think Radical Acceptance is the bit of advice that I'd give to, give to women.
Yeah, definitely. I think that just reminded me of another one that kind of blew my mind, but that I see happen so much is that we sabotage our own communication. So you were saying we can kind of get in our own way and stuff. And that's definitely a way that I didn't think of. Like you just think that you have horrible communication. You don't think of that you're actually in the way of your own communication with your spouse. And so,
but it's what I'd love to add on to that because I think it's so important that it's imparted to the words, right? I mean, of course, but only 30% of communication is verbal. The vast majority is nonverbal. So it's your facial expression, it's your body language, it's your energy, right? However you're feeling, if you're feeling filled with, anger and resentment, it's going to come out. If you're filled with love and you're really trying to sort through something, it's going to come out. Like we are all, very psychically connected, whether we are conscious of that or not. So the more that I can kind of cleanse myself and come from a place of love and abundance, the better able I'm going to communicate that to somebody else. And the more, the opposite is true. The more I come from a place of scarcity and fear, then the more that is going to, imbue the communication. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they do say, actions speak louder than words. So that totally makes sense that would apply in this situation as well. Mm-hmm. And then my last question for you is if you could tell your younger self one thing, assuming that she would listen, what would it be?
I think it would be trust yourself and the universe, and it goes very much back to the book that I recommended, A Return to Love. Marianne Williamson talks so beautifully about how we are, and I tell my kids this every night. We are made of love, and whether and she talks so beautifully about whether you're religious or not religious, or spiritual or Muslim or Christian or Jewish or atheist. Her whole thing is we are made of love. And if we can remember that we're made of love and that we can trust ourselves and trust the universe and relax a little bit. I mean, if I was able to, I wish I would have been able to do that much more powerfully 20 years ago, because I think, a lot of the heartache that I've gone through in my life would have been either minimized or non-existent. But I think I've figured it out now. So not too late to give myself that advice.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm so grateful for all the information that you provided. And where can we all follow you and find your book and keep up with what is going on and all those things?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, there's, of course, yourtango.com. There's a lot of Radical Acceptance editorial there. I write a fair amount. And then, in fact, since you asked, I'm going to give a little shout out for myself. Every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern at 10:15 p.m. Eastern time. If you go to the Your Tango page, you'll see I'm doing a Facebook Live. I call it Radical Acceptance Live with Andrea Miller. So I take questions and just talk about what's cooking. And then my Twitter is Andrea Your Tango. We have a website called radicalacceptance.love. And you can buy my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you're in New York, there's a wonderful independent book chain called Book Culture that has my book. So yeah, there are a lot of ways to find me and what I'm doing.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely link to your Facebook Lives because that would be a great way for us to actually be able to have one-on-one conversations and get advice.
Yeah, totally. All right, wonderful. Ashley, thank you so much, and congratulations and good work to you for creating this podcast for these kinds of conversations. It really takes a village, and it's great just to have you so passionately trying to help your listeners too.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode with Andrea Miller. Make sure you go and check out her show notes page at today'seden.com/podcasts, PODCASTS/029. And there I will have linked to her website, Your Tango. You guys, that blog or website, Your Tango, has lots of good articles on just ways that we can love ourselves, love our spouses better, use her teachings towards our children. It's just really good. You should definitely check it out. I will also link to her Facebook Lives that she was talking about in the interview, because I think that if you guys have any questions, or if you want to go more in depth or see what she's more about, that is definitely a good way to see that, of course, in video, in person, live. If you have been enjoying this podcast or this specific podcast episode, I would love for you to share this with a friend. And if you have the extra time, leave a rating or a review on iTunes. And the quote I'm going to leave you with today is, "In every disagreement in marriage, remember this one important truth. My spouse is my partner, not my enemy. We will either win together or we will lose together."